The Parti Québécois brings something different to the table than Parti libéral du Québec and Québec solidaire. And on those days that we don't even have a single question and that we hear the Liberal Party ask six questions, I mean, at some point, it just doesn't make sense for democracy. So now we think it's going to be fixed, and at least we have one intervention every day to make sure that we bring something to the table, and we're capable of that.
So that's Paul St. Pierre Plamondon, the leader of the PQ, after they won yesterday's by-election in the Jean Talon riding. Tom Mulcair is on the line. Tom, is that true? So now that they have a fourth member, they get to stand up in the National Assembly and get to ask a question?
They get to ask to have a question every day. It's not going to automatically, sorry about that, it's not going to automatically be granted to them. They've got to ask for it. But I think that it would be unseemly, indeed churlish, if the other parties were to deny them the obvious right to have at least one question a day. Just in terms of their numbers, they represent about 11% of the opposition. It's not an argument to say that the Liberals get this many questions, because the Liberals have many more seats than they do. But it's unfair for them to have not a single question a day. Okay. It would allow them to put their subject of the day on the agenda. And if the other parties don't do it, then we do have a problem with democracy. I agree with Paul St. Pierre Plamondon on that. After their smashing and totally unpredictable 2-for-1 victory over the CAQ, you saw François Legault this afternoon swallowing himself whole, just saying, oh, well, I think I'm going to start consulting the population and listening to them. Who knew that was part of democracy?
Imagine that.
I will ask the question, though. Yes, we heard him say that, and I think to myself, this is more of a slap in the face to him than just a by-election loss when you consider that he invested time in going into that riding, supporting his candidate, and that's a bit of a rebuke for him.
Oh, it's a very personal rebuke. You know, I lived in Quebec City. Catherine and I lived up there. You know, we raised our kids, through the beginning of their schooling and stuff in Quebec City. But I can tell you that it was very obvious that these are very proud people. And there had been this key promise that got Legault elected in 2018 and took pretty well all the seats in the Quebec City area, with a promise to build this famous third link between the two shores of the St. Lawrence at that city. And he got elected on it again in 2022. And then a few months after the election, he said, well, I've been looking at the numbers, and maybe ridership is down on the existing bridges. Maybe we don't need this thing anymore. And he pulled the plug on it, pulled another thing out of his hat it was some sort of tunnel thing, made absolutely no sense. It was pure malarkey. So he's either going to have to, again, swallow himself whole and say, okay, I've been wrong all along. Let's go back to the plan that never really existed to have a new bridge. But for security reasons, they need that new link. But Legault is just in a terrible spot right now. Plus, St. Pierre Plamondon might have gotten a bit ahead of himself last night. He was saying, well, this looks good for the next election. Woof, that's more than 3 years away. But he is able to say one thing, and he said it very well, which is, we have proven that the CAQ is not invincible. And boy, did Legault realize that one today.
So what have we proven about the state of the Liberal Party with 8.85% vote only?
I might surprise you by trying to say that, of course, being in single digits is just a further proof of the fact that the party's in free fall. But you have to realize that there was a ton of strategic voting last night. So Quebec Solidaire was down from the general election. They were in the 23-24% zone, down to 16.5%. That's a big drop. But they were just 3.5 points behind the CAQ. So what actually happened, Natasha, is that there was a lot of what's called strategic voting. People saying, just tell me which one of these four opposition parties has the best chance of defeating Legault. And people, including people that I know in Quebec City who are dyed-in-the-wool Liberals who would never in their life vote PQ, they voted PQ. And they were saying anything to get rid of Legault and to Legault's candidate in this case, but send him a strong message that we're not putting up with his nonsense anymore. So there was a lot of that, because if you were to believe the vote last night, between the PQ's vote and Quebec Solidaire, people tend to forget that Quebec Solidaire says that it's a sovereignist party as well. That would have meant an over 60% vote for sovereignist parties. But it's not a real vote. It's a protest vote, and it's strategic voting.
Also big turnout, right? Which means that people were mad.
Massive turnout. Totally right in that interpretation as well. That's a desire for change. But a good by-election turnout, 30%, 35% high water mark. This was well over 50% turnout for a by-election. Absolutely phenomenal.
All right. We don't usually spend a lot of time talking American politics, but there are a couple of big stories, at least one huge story today.
Yes.
Look, I know we have a new Speaker of the House, Greg Fergus, and let's be honest, that's mainly a ceremonial role here, that position. In the U.S., a bit different. When the Speaker of the House is voted out, as Natasha said when we kind of talked about this 20 minutes ago, this has never, ever happened before in American history. So, Tom, from what you know, What does this change? How significant is this?
It's incredibly significant. And just to reinforce what you're saying, after the president and the vice president, that's the third person in order in the United States overall. So it's a hugely important job. McCarthy, as you recall, had to go through any number of votes to finally get elected. And now the lunatic wing of the Republican Party has had him thrown out. So good luck finding his replacement, because the lunatic wing only has so many votes. So now that they've gone through that great feeling of getting rid of somebody who did that horrible thing of keeping the U.S. government going, who wants that? Now it's up to them to say, okay, we know what you're against, but what are you for? Yeah. And that's going to prove a lot trickier. Look, some of these people are absolute wing nuts. And we know them. Getz is the one who was behind this. Great. So you're going to put him in as the third most powerful person in the United States? Is that what you guys actually believe? This is, of course, Donald J. Trump pulling the strings behind the scene, telling his wacko wing that's time to do everything they can to shut things down, to make it impossible to govern. That's his recipe for politics in the United States. I think it's a recipe for disaster, and I believe that there's a fellow in the Kremlin right now, Putin is his name, who's probably rubbing his hands saying, I can't believe my luck in the past couple of weeks. First I have the Canadian Parliament applauding a guy who was in a Nazi regiment, and now I've got the United States self-immolating, pulling themselves apart. What could we do better? Because this is all, one of the key things here is whether or not the Americans are going to be able to keep funding the Ukrainian armed forces against Putin's illegal war against them. So this is an unbelievable state of affairs for the Americans, but something we've grown used to during the Trump years. And of course, one day that'll be gone as well. But if you listen to the very important words that are coming out of the people who are closest to him, including a former chief of staff, they're describing a picture of someone who is completely unhinged, and they're describing him as very dangerous for American democracy. I always thought that might be a bit exaggerated, but when you see stuff like this, you realize, no, this is actually what's happening. And yes, he is dangerous for that country that's gotten through 250 years without this type of upheaval.
I will mention the other thing I referred to when I said two things going on today, maybe not as big a deal, but I see the judge in his New York fraud case has now issued a gag order, which is about the worst thing you could do, I would think, if you're Donald Trump, right? Have someone tell you you can't talk about something.
He can't talk anymore, and he's just going to plead his First Amendment right to free speech, and he's going to probably keep going. But there is a little thing called contempt of court, and judges can put you in jail right away. They don't need another judge's permission. They don't need to start. They get to decide when somebody's in contempt and can put them in the who's gal. So we'll see if that's what's in store for Donald Trump. He'll probably take another mugshot that'll increase his funding.
We were talking earlier about how Canada, generally speaking, like we don't have a whole lot of drama, and it's been lately it's like, oh well, we actually have had a little bit. When you have a day like this in the States, it's like it's okay, it's all right to have less drama here. What do you think of Greg Fergus, the Liberal Quebec MP? Being voted in as the new Speaker of the House.
Super smart guy. When I say perfectly bilingual, hardworking. And I sat with him for a couple of years, and I got to see him go. Mr. Singh and Mr. Trudeau pointed out immediately that he's the first black person to occupy that important function in our parliament, and I think that they're right to underscore that. And as Mr. Singh said in his remarks, he said, a lot of young people don't recognize themselves in all of the people who are in the portraits as you go down the galleries in the House of Commons, but now a lot of them will see somebody that represents who they are. So that was all good points. Now, as to him being in that job, I will say that having sat with him, he is somebody that prior to attaining this job, maybe it'll all change now, was, in my view, highly partisan. In other words, if you take an image from sports, the referee doesn't wear the colors of one of the teams. They wear their special garb. Well, there's a special robe that whoever's in the speaker's chair wears, and they're not on one of the teams. I think that Mr. Fergus is going to have to be told that even if he's wearing the striped jersey of the referee, he's not allowed to be wearing his red Liberal shirt underneath, because I think that would be his first tendency. So we'll see if he's able to shake off that highly partisan attitude that I've seen on his part in the past.
How would that even come to the fore? If you're the Speaker of the House, when would you see something like that happen? You'd sit back and go, wait a sec.
Every day, because they can they're always making decisions like a referee. They're making calls based on the rules that exist and how they're interpreting them. So yes, there's every opportunity to make rulings that could affect one party or the other. Every ruling does. One party stands up and says, well, this is unfair under this rule, and you make a ruling. And so if if there is that tendency to say, oh, tie goes to the runner, and every time the runner is somebody from my former team, I'll lean that way, then you've got a problem. It'll be picked up immediately by the other parties, and they'll raise a stink about it. There is such a thing as dropping that partisanship once you're in the chair. I've seen that as well. So maybe he's going to be one of the people who can do that. But I do find it fair to comment on the fact that having known him and seen him at work, I have found him very partisan. And in his commentary, because he used to do a fair bit of commentary on the air as well.
All right, a lot of ground to cover today. Tom, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
Great to talk to you.
All right, take good care.